Ever notice how ads always pop up at the worst moments? When the killer's identity is about to be revealed. During that perfect meditation flow. On Amazon Music, we believe in keeping you in the moment. That's why we've got millions of ad-free podcast episodes, so you can stay completely immersed in every story, every reveal, every breath. Download the Amazon Music app and start listening to your favorite podcasts ad-free, included with Prime.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling three really big stories. Headlines that seem pretty separate at first glance: a global conflict update, a domestic political mess, and some major corporate layoffs. Our mission here is to kind of weave these together, show you how chaos way up at the top can actually, well, create uncertainty in your own life.
That's right. We're essentially tracing what you could call a trickle-down of chaos.
Yeah.
It's a simple idea. Really, when things get unstable at the highest levels, think geopolitics, national politics, even big corporations, that instability, it doesn't just stay there. It eventually shows up for everyday people as, economic worries, job insecurity.
Exactly. So we'll be looking at the latest rhetoric coming out of Russia regarding Ukraine. Then we'll shift to the U.S., talk about this Trump-Epstein files situation and what it means for, well, credibility. And finally, bring it right down to the economic impact with these Starbucks closures and layoffs. It's quite a journey.
It is. So let's start big picture on the global stage.
Right. The headline that jumped out was Russia saying it had no choice but war. And they're tying this specifically to what they see as a U-turn from the West, particularly related to former President Trump's stance on Ukraine.
Okay, that phrase, no choice. We really need to unpack that. Russia is trying to frame its ongoing offensive. And remember, this conflict didn't start yesterday. It's been going on for years.
3.5 years, by their own choice, really.
Exactly. So they're framing this continuation not as their decision, but as something inevitable, forced upon them. Necessary, they say, for the present and the future of our country. It's very deliberate framing.
And you see people reacting to that framing online, right? Like one Redditor just nailed it, saying, no choice but war after 3.5 years of war, entirely by their choice.
It perfectly captures the public skepticism. It feels like projection, trying to shift blame outward, especially when you look at what's happening inside Russia.
Yeah, let's talk about that internal pressure because it's significant. Sources are reporting Ukraine has managed to hit, 23 out of 46 key Russian oil refineries?
That's the number. And it means a loss of over 50% of their production capacity.
Wow, that's huge.
It's crippling. And when you're facing that kind of internal damage, that kind of economic hit to your war machine, well, you tend to ramp up the tough talk externally, don't you?
It forces the bluster, essentially.
Precisely. It distracts. And it feeds into this longer-term question that military observers have had for, decades, really, about Russia's actual strength.
You mean the whole long con bluff idea, that their perceived power might be exaggerated?
Exactly. Since the 80s, there's been this undercurrent of thought among analysts that maybe Russia's military capabilities, maybe even their nuclear threat, it's all been, propped up, built on systems that are perhaps more fragile, more corrupt, more decayed than they appear. We've seen reports over the years about things like missile silos just not being maintained.
Okay, but if that's true, if their strength is a bluff, doesn't that make things even more unstable? Because the rest of the world is reacting, spending billions, planning defenses based on a threat level that might not be entirely real.
It absolutely injects more instability. The bluff itself is destabilizing. Western countries pour resources into countering this perceived threat. Then, the moment Russia's actual weaknesses start showing, like with these refinery attacks, the whole global risk calculation has to shift, maybe violently. Policy uncertainty shoots up. And when global policy gets uncertain, leaders back home, both political and corporate, they tend to freeze up or make very short-term decisions.
Right. So global instability fuels posturing and maybe hides weakness. Let's see how that pattern plays out domestically. When powerful people feel threatened or fear exposure, they often try to control the story, right? Which brings us to Washington and this Epstein files situation.
Yeah, a definite shift here, but a similar dynamic of instability and narrative control. So this hidden camera tape emerges. It's published by James O'Keefe, who's, let's say, a controversial figure.
Formerly of Project Veritas, known for that kind of work.
Right. And the tape features a man named Glenn Prager, described as a former DOJ program analyst. And Prager is on tape claiming that Donald Trump covered up files related to the Epstein case.
Okay, and the claim gets very specific. Prager alleges Trump wasn't protecting himself. He says Trump wasn't involved in the worst of it, the flights with minors, but was shielding others. He specifically names Bill Clinton. So the narrative being pushed is Trump's actually innocent here, maybe even acting, dare I say, selflessly.
Which, given everything, immediately sets off alarm bells. First, the source. O'Keefe and his history, often accused of using deceptive edits, clear political agenda, Magier aligned. You have to factor that in.
Absolutely. Credibility is questionable from the start.
Then there's Prager himself. Reports indicate he hasn't actually worked at the DOJ for about 15 years. His time ended back during the Obama administration.
So a long time ago. It all feels very engineered. This kind of information dropping right now.
And the core claim itself. Trump, known for prioritizing his own interests above pretty much everything else, suddenly acting to protect a political rival like Clinton. It just doesn't track. Unless, of course, that protection somehow benefits Trump directly, perhaps by controlling how damaging information about everyone involved might come out. That's the more cynical, perhaps more realistic interpretation. It feels less about the truth of the files themselves and more about managing perceptions, pre-spinning maybe, sowing doubt and confusion before anything official potentially drops.
And that has real consequences. It doesn't almost matter what the final truth is. When you flood the zone with this kind of charged, unreliable information from sources with known agendas,
it just poisons the well.
Yeah.
Public trust evaporates. How can you believe any information that comes out later, even if it's official?
Exactly. It breeds cynicism. People just throw up their hands. And that breakdown of trust, that's instability right there. It paralyzes governance.
And again, you see this cynicism reflected immediately in public comments. Like that one Redditor who said, if James O'Keefe walked up to me and said, my name is James O'Keefe, I would not take that as fact.
It sums it up perfectly. When you can't trust the information flow, when institutions feel compromised, it creates this deep unease, which logically connects to economic decision-making, right? Uncertainty makes markets nervous.
Definitely. Risk becomes harder to price. Businesses hesitate.
Okay, so we've got simmering global conflict fueled by rhetoric masking weakness. We've got domestic political chaos driven by secrecy and attacks on credibility. How does all this high-level instability finally land on, say, your local coffee shop? How does it hit jobs, benefits, the price of a latte? This brings us to Starbucks.
Yeah, the Starbucks announcement. Significant store closures. We're talking hundreds of locations. Now, in the grand scheme, Starbucks has around 19,000 stores in North America, so hundreds is about 1%. Corporately, maybe that sounds small.
But for the people working there, it's not small at all.
Not at all. That 1% translates into potentially thousands of jobs gone. And losing a job is bad enough, but with Starbucks, it often meant losing key benefits too, things like health insurance, maybe help with school tuition, really vital stuff.
And Starbucks always had this image, right? Kind of an affordable luxury, but also a company that prided itself on offering better than average benefits for retail work. That partner identity.
That social contract seems to be fraying, maybe snapping, and the contrast is just stark. You have potentially thousands of employees facing the loss of healthcare, education support, and in the same breath, the company announces the CEO, Brian Nichols, total compensation for 2024.
Get ready for this number.
It's $95.8 million.
$95.8 million. It's almost hard to process. That makes him one of the highest paid CEOs in the country.
It breaks down to something like $262,000 a day.
Per day. And it's not just salary, right? There were big bonuses involved.
Oh, yeah. A $5 million cash sign-on bonus was part of it. And maybe most symbolic of the disconnect, he apparently uses a corporate-funded private jet to commute. Weekly, from his home down in Southern California up to the headquarters in Seattle.
While at the same time, the company is pushing mandatory return to office for its other corporate staff based in Seattle.
Correct. The optics are, well, they're not great. It suggests a completely different set of rules apply at the very top.
And people notice that hypocrisy. You saw it in the online reactions. Things like this comment, potentially thousands of people are going to lose health insurance and school benefits, just focusing on the human cost.
That disparity fuels resentment, feeds into that sense of instability and unfairness. Now, the company cites reasons for the closures, of course.
Right. What are the official lines?
Well, oversaturation is likely part of it. You know, the classic Starbucks across the street from another Starbucks. But a huge factor seems to be affordability. People just can't swing it anymore. That $5 latte is now creeping towards $8, sometimes more, in many places.
Which pushes it out of that daily treat category for a lot of folks who are already squeezed by inflation everywhere else.
Exactly. But there's another layer, too, a suspicion that can't be ignored.
Union busting.
It's strongly suspected. There are suggestions that many of the stores being targeted for closure happen to be locations that have unionized or are in the process. If that's the primary driver, then it shifts from a purely economic decision to something more politically motivated within the company, aimed at weakening collective bargaining power.
Which ties back perfectly to our theme, instability used strategically.
It does.
So let's connect the dots one last time. How does a war in Eastern Europe or a political scandal tape in D.C. lead to someone losing their job at Starbucks?
It's that trickle-down effect. The instability at the top, geopolitical risk, political paralysis, lack of trust, creates an environment of economic fear and uncertainty. Global supply chains get shaky. Policy becomes unpredictable. So what do corporations do, especially publicly traded ones? They often react with short-term, aggressive cost-cutting to reassure nervous shareholders. Protect the bottom line now.
And the easiest, fastest way to cut costs is often people, layoffs.
Precisely. And the system rewards it. The CEO who makes those tough calls, who cuts deep, even if destabilizes thousands of lives, gets the $95.8 million compensation package. The system incentivizes that short-term thinking.
So the chaos cascades down. War abroad creates economic jitters. Political infighting erodes trust and paralyzes action. Corporations respond by optimizing for immediate profit, often at the expense of their workforce.
That's the thread. It's a systematic prioritization, it seems, of self-interest, maybe coercion in the case of union busting, and definitely short-term financial gain over long-term stability, ethical governance, and, frankly, human well-being. The financial security of the average person, the one making the coffee or working the register, becomes the shock absorber for instability created much higher up. As that other Redditor put it, summing up a certain view of that corporate dynamic, damn CEOs truly are just leeches, benefiting from the instability they help perpetuate.
It really paints a picture of power operating without sufficient accountability across different sectors, government, global politics, corporations.
It does. And maybe that leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Think about that $95.8 million figure again. Just try to grasp the scale of it. $262,000 a day. If our current system places that kind of value on one person's leadership that coincides with thousands losing jobs and benefits, what value does that same system implicitly place on the stability and security of those thousands of households that were just disrupted? What does that fundamental gap in valuation tell us about where things might be headed?